And welcome to Connections listeners. I'm your host, Hannah-Leigh Myers. It's our Friday morning call-in program. And this morning we're bringing you another special Connections program as part of our ongoing series with the Foundations for Leaders Organizing for Water and Sustainability, or FLOWS team. This series is made possible by a grant from Boulder County. And if you'd like to hear the entire series, including workshops and various radio stories, FLOWS team profiles, sustainability tips, and our previous Connections program, visit news.kgnu.org. On today's show, we're going to remind you about FLOWS' unique approach to sustainability, and we're going to be speaking with the FLOWS founder and a coordinator, as well as two FLOWS student technicians, and talk to them about how their sustainability work connects to their personal stories. We'll also be leaving more time in this Part 2 program to talk about some sustainability tips, specific ones, and how those practices directly relate to some of the bigger environmental issues that we're seeing today. First, before we start the conversation, let's set the stage by introducing our FLOWS guests. I'm joined this morning by Michelle Gabrieloff-Parrish, FLOWS founder and Energy and Climate Justice Assistant Director at the University of Colorado Boulder's Environmental Center. Michelle is a former U.S. State Department Bold Food Fellow and former Center for Progressive Leadership Fellow. She is also a multi-ethnic writer, poet, and student teacher of ecological permaculture design. She's a wife and mother of three. And Michelle, I think you might have an updated title. Is that your correct title as with the Justice Center, or did you get a new spot there?
Yeah, I'm the assistant director.
You're the assistant director. Okay, congratulations on that.
Justice. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. We also are joined in the studio by Angela Maria Ortiz Roa. She is originally was a FLOWS resident technician. She's now a FLOWS coordinator. Angela is also a member of the Climate Justice Leaders Program, which we will talk about a little bit more later in the show. She's a language service provider in Spanish, English, and American Sign Language, and Angela's experience as an urban agriculture educator, receiving her permaculture certificate in 2014. In addition, Angela is a hardworking single mother and Colombian native that came to the U.S. in 2001. Thank you so much for being here, Angela.
Thank you, Hannah-Leigh.
And our two resident technicians that we have in here this morning. We had two resident technicians, last time, and we have two new resident technicians here. We are joined by Remy Rule. She's a FLOWS student technician studying physics, Spanish, environmental studies, and leadership at CU Boulder. Remy, thank you so much for being here as well.
Thank you for having me.
We also are joined by Anduni and Florian. Has that your correct?
Adeduni Florin.
Florin, thank you. Who is a FLOWS student technician and a geology student at CU Boulder. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So to start, let's make sure that everybody knows what FLOWS does. So if we could have Angela or Michelle, if you want to tell us a little bit about what FLOWS does and kind of what the group is all about.
Sure, I'll get started with that. So FLOWS is the Foundations for Leaders Organizing for Water and Sustainability. We are a group that is housed at the Environmental Center here at CU Boulder, and we work in partnership with Boulder Housing Partners, which is the local housing authority in our city. We work in visiting affordable housing units here in the city and providing free water and energy upgrades to each unit. So what we do is we work in teams, we usually partner students and residents, and we go into people's homes and we provide this water and energy upgrades that are free to the residents, but we partner or we team that service with a very rich dialogue around what sustainability practices are. And that the unique approach that the FLOWS has is the fact that we go in celebrating what the communities in this affordable housing units are already doing. I feel like instead of going in there and preaching about the things that need to be changed or the things that people are not doing, we go in to celebrate what people are already doing, because we know already that those communities are the communities with the lowest carbon footprint in the city. So we're going in and labeling their practices as leadership and celebrating it as such. So we work with students of the university and with people from the communities themselves. And something that is particularly exciting about our program is the fact that we're able to compensate the participation both of the students by hiring them through the environmental center, but also compensate the participation that the residents provide to the program through stipends. So I think that's very unique and empowers the community to be part of this process.
And you also have workshops, which we featured this week. We had a biochar workshop feature that aired, and other workshops as well. So you do the home visits, and you also have involvement with policy, which is another interesting element that we've featured in our series with Flows. Can you talk a little bit about the Just Transition Collaborative, the connection there, as well as maybe a little bit on some of the workshops you've done, some of those other elements of what Flows does?
Happily. So the workshops are in part so that we can help train up the community as well as students, mostly in climate justice and a lot of different aspects around climate justice. Some of our workshops are communal, and we invite any BHP resident or really any low-income resident in the area to participate, and then some of them are really more for our core team. And then a few years ago, when the city was first looking at passing their current climate action plan, we helped give input that there wasn't enough in there about equity, and there wasn't enough in there about community mobilization, especially for low-income community members. So we luckily they agreed, and they had us host an event where we really talked with residents, and actually we trained residents in this World Cafe sort of interactive style of gathering information from large groups of people in a way that's really fun and interactive. And then we held this event where we asked people what their needs are, basically. And so we used some of that feedback and turned it into a report that ties their needs into climate issues. So, for example, a lot of people name transportation and housing, and so we help make some of those connections of why transportation is a climate issue, which I don't think anyone would argue against, and how housing is a climate issue, and that is a little bit more complicated, I think, in this area for people to really wrap their heads around. And then during that process, also the city said, hey, Michelle, there's some other folks who've mentioned putting equity into this plan. Do you want to get together with them? So the city introduced several of us who had the same feedback for the city, and we formed the Just Transition Collaborative. So that's where JTC is coming from, is Just Transition Collaborative. And part of that process was, again, to sort of train up communities kind of in the way that Flows does, and build capacity, teach people about climate, and set up situations where they're speaking with policymakers and sort of prepare the policymakers to listen to low-income residents as well. So all of that has been a really interesting and dynamic process.
And we do want to remind our listeners that Connection is, of course, a call-in program. So we're going to go into asking our two Flows student resident technicians about their stories, but we want to go ahead and start inviting calls. If you are interested in sustainability issues, if you are interested in some of the stuff that Flows does, some of the work that they're doing, do go ahead and give us a call here. The number is 303-442-4242. We would love to hear from you. We had people calling in last time. We apologize. We had our phone issues with our phone. Phones are all good to go. We are inviting you to call in and participate in this conversation. We'd love to hear from you. Questions, comments. The phone line again is 303-442-4242. So as we wait for those calls to come in, Remy Rule, I want to start with you. How long have you been a Flows member?
So I started at Flows last September, so about a year.
And tell us about who you are, your background. Obviously, doing this kind of work, I know being a student, you're a very busy person, but you are donating quite a bit of time and effort to be part of this Flows team and sought out this specific type of work. So if you could tell us a little bit about your background, who you are, and then we'll dig into a little bit of how your participation at Flows, how you feel about that, what you've been up to.
Sure. So how I ended up at Flows has to do with this larger overarching narrative of my time at CU Boulder. I started and I wanted to be a physicist and a scientist, and my dream was to win a Nobel Prize and be one of the only one of the few women physicists that have won Nobel Prizes. But I was really involved in that community, and I was doing a lot of work there, and I just felt in a lot of ways isolated or alienated, like I wasn't really connecting with the world outside of school. And I had, the same time, was maybe going through a little bit of a personal crisis about climate change and the environment and all that stuff. And I actually had the fortune of going to Panama with a scholarship program that I'm part of at CU called the President's Leadership Class. And I did a research project on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 15, which is about forests and sustainable forest management. And I studied Indigenous land rights titling and the link between Indigenous land rights titling and preventing deforestation. And that was sort of my first maybe academic introduction to what environmental justice is. And so I came back to CU and I was really interested in becoming involved and getting to know more. And I found flows just by a Google search of environmental justice, CU Boulder. And I applied, I think, the day after the deadline. And Michelle was nice enough to still interview me and pick me. And then I was an intern for Flows this past spring, helping Angela with like data entry and tracking our forms down. And I'm helping again this semester with sort of our program redesign. It's important to me because I feel like probably the base of sustainability work is community and learning from the community and organizing and not going at issues alone. And Flows does a really good job at breaking the isolation that you can feel as being part of an academic institution and connecting you with people in the real world and also challenging ideas of what is knowledge and what is expertise and who knows what's the best thing to do. Where in school you're always like, oh, it's your professor, it's your textbook. But with Flows we learn a lot. I think we learn more from the people we work with than they learn from us. So it's been a really important part of my time here as far as seeing what sustainability work actually looks like.
And to dig into a little bit as much as you're comfortable, I can't help but respond to your comment about being in a bit of a climate-related crisis.
Yeah.
I think you're not alone in that. And looking at students across the globe, you're not alone in that. I'm interested thinking about how you were feeling before going to Panama and coming back. If you could tell us a little bit about some of those issues that you're wrestling with and what it was like when returning, I guess, from doing that kind of work and focusing on that, and then coming back to maybe that culture that was problematic and causing some emotional stress at the get-go. If you could tell us a little bit about that experience and those feelings.
Yeah, so environmentalism has always been something that's really important in my family. Like, my great-grandpa was a water lawyer, and my brother's studying environmental engineering, and my mom was one of the moms who petitioned to Denver to keep municipal composting when they're gonna have to make you pay for it and all that kind of stuff. So we've had solar panels since 2007 on our house, and so there's always been this idea of environmentalism, but I think that's a very specific type of environmentalism that comes with having the privilege to pay to put solar panels on your house and to have access to municipal services that value recycling and composting. And I started, I think, to go through this idea, well, that's great. My dad drives an electric car and I compost, but we still have all these problems. And I think I was feeling like I was trying to do everything I could and I still wasn't seeing a change. And then when I went to Panama, I think I saw environmental issues framed in a different way, where here were people saying well, this is our way of life and we want to protect how we live and our culture and our customs, and that also goes along with valuing the environment and not treating the environment as something that we can just take from and abuse, and it serves us. It's like a symbiotic relationship. And that's a lot of what environmental justice work is about, as far as having a different mentality and idea of what the environment is and what its purpose is in our lives. So coming back, I think it was nice just to also in Panama, their story isn't necessarily this worked 100%, but they do have some success. And it was also nice to not just be bombarded with the earth is dying and all these sort of gloomy stories, and actually see, here's some work that people are actually doing and it's successful. And if we can support this, that we might have a fighting chance. So.
And since you've been with Flows, what have been some of your favorite bits of work that you've done? You guys have been busy and you do a lot of different things. What's some of your favorite pieces?
Yeah, I think, Angela was think of a story of your favorite home visit. I think that my favorite piece is actually just getting to like meet people face to face and like hearing what they do in their everyday lives. Like a lot of people, you'll say, oh, you should like do this to conserve water, and they're like, I already do that. Or I can't think of like specific examples, but also people are, to me, what surprised me are overwhelmingly friendly and overwhelmingly welcome, and they will bring you into your home and give you tea and sit and talk to you for an hour about water or composting or whatever it may be. So I think I kind of forgot the question. I maybe just went on a little tangent.
No. Your favorite parts, the favorite things you do, home visits.
Yeah, home visits, definitely. I think that's the biggest thing is even if like we don't pass out any light bulbs, just getting to talk to someone face to face and seeing what they're doing and how we can learn from them and how we can collaborate with them in the future, whether it's getting their email or their phone number and trying to reconnect with them.
One thing to interject from working on this series that I think that speaks to that was the one home visit that I was lucky enough to go with the Flows team and participate and go into a gentleman's home. The humanizing element, where I think a lot of times we look at environmental issues and sustainability in terms of statistics and numbers and trying to like, how can we make this number? How can we cut emissions? How can we do this? But it was a really unique experience to kind of bring face and reality to some of those numbers. And the gentleman we spoke with, one of the things that he was talking about was having all of his devices, how many iPads and stuff they had in there plugged in all the time, which I think on its face really easily would be to just be like, well, that's not great, But what was really humanizing about it is that he then mentioned that multiple of his children have disabilities, and that as a parent, when they're having a meltdown that is, related to just kind of the stress of being on the spectrum, that having their reading that was on there, that really meant a lot to them. And it was interesting to me that it was like, on one hand, you just see, on like a questionnaire, I guess, as like, oh, it's a person that has all their stuff plugged in all the time. But then my heart went out to this single dad that like had his had two kids that are on the spectrum, that he was doing his best, and that it really meant a lot for them them to be able to use the iPads to read. And if they weren't charged, he was like, that's a meltdown that I don't know if I can do by myself. And that was a cool moment to see that it was like, it wasn't just a statistic, a person that you might be like, oh, eyebrow raised, it was like there's a human story to each person, and why maybe the questionnaire, which we are going to go into on the show a little bit of with the home visits, of some of the questions that you guys asked that are really enlightening for people. I think watching Magnolia Lanesposas was there, and she was going through, she's a Flows member, and she was going through the questionnaires, how there's just kind of light bulbs is kind of a funny term to use, since that's kind of what light bulbs going off and of like, oh yeah, we do kind of do that. And I know in that case she had mentioned power strips being a thing that might be good, that if you had a lot of things plugged into power strips that maybe were the ones that could be unplugged when leaving the house or something like that could really cut down on, I think she was talking about phantom load, about how much of our electricity bills are just from things being plugged in and left on when we're out of the house. So it really is cool, the humanizing element, and it's more than just the questionnaire and the statistics, but walking away from that and having that data, but also having the kind of humanizing issues that maybe are behind the data. So I agree. Remy going on one home visit, I can relate to the home visit stories were great. Michelle?
Yeah, well, I feel like a lot of times what we have found, and I keep finding this over and over, I think maybe part of that definition of sustainability and environmentalism that Remy was talking about, people really take to heart, and they sort of beat themselves up about little things like having their iPad plugged in all the time, and then feel like, oh, I must not be an environmentalist because I leave my iPad plugged in all the time. And it's like, but really, you're doing all of these other things. You're taking short showers. You are, you're sitting down with us for a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour to talk about sustainability because you're that passionate about the issues that we face. And I think, we should probably also mention on this show that this week, the U.S. really started the legal process of pulling out of the Paris Agreement, and being basically the only country to do that. when we know we have some of the largest impact in terms of climate and emissions. So I think that that's part of the policy thing with flows as well, is that there is a lot that we can do as individuals. And as we see the country pulling out of the Paris Agreement, maybe it's on us even more than usual to take it upon ourselves to do what we can. But part of that is also lobbying and talking to folks and, creating programs like this one or joining a group because, the city of Boulder is one of the cities in the country and actually in the world that is helping to lead the charge of saying, you know what, even if the federal government isn't going to agree to these things, we are, and we're going to do what we can as a city, and we're going to stay in to Paris agreements and other, aggressive climate action. So, we're just trying to help people understand it's this holistic thing. It's not just about one thing. And luckily, in the case of this one home visit, we do have power strips, and things staying plugged in actually does have an impact. And up to 10% of people's utility bills are coming from phantom loads and things just being plugged in, or those little lights that let you know that a appliance is off or on. So yeah, that's all simple things that people can do, all the way up to, organizing, getting involved, and even doing policy and lobbying work.
And after we speak a little bit more, Adeduni, we're going to talk about your story here. I want to go into that a little bit more about kind of what Boulder's doing. And also I'm going to ask you coming up here in a bit about the response you've seen to some of the work that you've done. Because with the policy work that you've done, there's always the hope, right, that there's the response, that it's not just words. And so I'm curious to hear about that. So we'll ask you a little bit of that coming up here. But Adeduni, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your experience before Flows and what brought you to Flows. If you could tell us a little bit about who you are. I know you're a geology student, which probably has a unique perspective you bring to the table, huh?
Yeah. So I first entered at the university about 2 years ago, and I applied as a freshman to Flows, and I really wanted to just be a part of the environmental center when I was first coming in, because I read their mission statement and I was like, I have to be a part of this. I mean, this is like everything I believe in. And mostly I was really excited to be hired by Michelle and stuff, because I care about energy and most especially water management. And we focus on that too in Flows. We always suggest certain facts, and I think that that's part of the reason why I was kind of drawn into that, just to expand off of my major and stuff. So I'm also a computer science double major, and I think that I was kind of feeling isolated almost. I think about last year when I was getting into more of my upper division classes, even with geology, and the environmental center provided a community almost of like-minded people who care about things that a lot of scientists are missing, in terms of eco-social justice and even climate scientists. It's a certain context of who will actually be affected by these changes, and it will be mostly poor communities of color. Yeah, and I care so much about the upcoming future, because even thinking about where my parents came from, my parents are immigrants, and they're from Nigeria, and I always think about, so how does this affect the broader context? How does this affect the world when I'm studying this stuff? And it's quite sad, but I know that we can change a lot, especially in the U.S. We have so much opportunity to change. So let's do that, guys.
And one of the unique things that, Angela, you had mentioned earlier in the program about Flows kind of drawing off of the insight that people from with international backgrounds bring to the sustainability movement and specific perspectives that are often not given as much attention perhaps in what we would see as a Western sustainability movement. So Anadunia, I wanted to ask you about with your parents. Do any practices come to mind, anything that either they saw as immigrants coming to the U.S. that they're like, wow, that's wasteful, that they talked about, or any specific things that you guys did in your household that maybe at the time you might have not have seen as a sustainability practice that maybe now you do?
I mean, just for using containers, I didn't realize that apparently that was like not a thing. I mean, there's actually a joke within like second generation Nigerian Americans, like, oh, you have the margarine, or like you have an ice cream bucket and you always think it's filled with ice cream, but no, it's filled with soup, and you're just like, darn, when you open it in the fridge and stuff like that. I just remember just growing up thinking that was completely. I'm assuming, do Americans do that? I don't know.
No, not all. No,
Yeah.
household to household. Let's
Exactly,
at least
yeah.
give some people.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's like, it depends on the household for that, but that's a really common practice, just to reuse stuff in general and not be wasteful and finish all your food on throwing out food, and yeah, just being mindful that using as much as you can. I mean, you can't just waste stuff.
And I'm curious if that's something that's interesting for you too with flows, that there are a lot of people that either have come to the US from other countries themselves or have parents that have come to the US from other countries. I imagine there's some camaraderie there, that there's some of the jokes might not just be Nigerian
Yeah,
second
no,
generation.
it is. It's general, I think, honestly. We've all kind of joked around a little bit through the group. Yeah.
It's like a second meetup group for,
Yeah.
for children. And I want to ask you here in a second about some of your favorite flows activities. But before that, we do again want to invite callers to call in and join this conversation. We would love to hear from you. We are hearing from the Flows team, and that is the Foundations for Leaders Organizing for Water and Sustainability. And the number to call is 303-442-4242. Again, that's 303-442-4242. We know our listeners care about sustainability. We know there are things you get really, really excited about. We know there are things that really bother you about the sustainability movement and about what you're seeing as far as climate change and environmental degradation happening around the world and in the community. I know you all have ideas, so do call in. We would love to chat about that stuff with you. The Flows team is the perfect group of people. The 4 people in front of me would love to chat with you about your ideas. So give us a call again, 303-442-4242. And when we come back, we're going to take a really quick break. But when we come back, I'm going to ask you we do want to hear, Adaduni, about your favorite Flows activity. So give us a call again, 303-442-4242, and more stories to come. Stay tuned. And welcome back to Connections. The time is almost 9 o'clock, and you are listening to KGNU, Boulder, Denver, and Fort Collins. Again, we are having our second conversation with the Flows team. The Flows team is from CU Boulder, and we are talking today about some stories we haven't heard yet from two Flows resident technicians. And one of the parts of the story we haven't gotten yet is from Adaduni. We want to hear about what are some of your favorite things that you've done since you've been in Flows, since Flows does a lot of different stuff.
So, my favorite part about Flows, like Remy said, is just talking to people, in the community. It's kind of frustrating when you're surrounded by people that are around your age, like 24/7 every day. And when you get out and you talk to people who, have not real lives, like students have lives too, but don't have that like academic grind, and they're just not in the cycle. It just feels like you're connecting with something more, and you are. And My favorite visit I've had was with this man. He had this collection. I'm telling you, he had like plants surrounding his house and like everywhere. He had them in his living room, his kitchen, up on his ceilings, and it was beautiful. And he like oriented it so all the ones that needed a lot more sun were like west facing and stuff, and it was just a beautiful setup. And I remember just talking to him for like 15 to 20 minutes about like succulents and stuff. It was great. Yeah.
During this part of the show, we're also going to give you those specific tips as much as we can, things that you can do today to try to cut down on your footprint. But we're also going to try to share some facts with you, maybe some surprise aha moments or shocking moments. We do want to bring some of that to you this morning as well. So, Angela, if you want to start us off, what is if you have a sustainability tip for us, something that you can recommend that people can do today, and maybe an issue that it might be related to or not related to, that you think that we should be talking more about, or that you find particularly frustrating or exciting.
Sure. Oh, yes. So there's a few things I could mention. One that really I try to promote when we go into our home visits would be the use of reusable bags. I feel like there's a multi-level or multi-layered issue there, because the city is now charging us 10 cents per plastic bag that we use at the grocery stores. So it has deterred some people from using, and some people continue to see, oh, it's just 10 cents, I'm going to continue to do it. That's a little bit I feel like sometimes it really doesn't take much to keep a little bag or several bags in your car. I have bags everywhere in my car, in my house. And another thing that I find problematic with it is that sometimes then people go into the grocery stores and buy a lot of reusable bags. I feel like if we were in the habit of just, keeping those bags available in our trunk or whatever, I feel like that will be really simple solution, and, put things that we can start including into our daily practices, because believe it or not, we use around 350,000 plastic bags a day in Boulder. So you might be going into your grocery store and just buying one, but you are one of those 350,000 that we're using every day. So if you
don't leave them in your car.
Don't
also.
just go, and then I ran out there like you just like wait
every time left in the car, but just go back. If you leave them in the car, always go back. Go back. Get those bags.
Yes, that's a simple one there, but. Yeah.
And we have the in Boulder the tax rate on bags now, so I mean that number we'd hope has gone down. I don't know if anybody's seen.
Sure it has gone down,
but still high. So Jamie has given us a call back.
Yay.
Jamie, thank you for calling back. Are you there on the line?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. Thank you so
Jamie.
much for calling. So, what's your question or comment for us this morning?
Well, I live in Boulder Meadows Mobile Home Park, and we have serious environmental issues here, and I'm wondering if Flows has worked in the park, because we have people don't compost here. And I was a representative for EcoCycle, and I gave out information, and I finally gave up because people ignore it. And so we have a need for lots of instruction and education here. I don't know why people won't get involved, but we have just very serious issues with people not working well with the program. I mean, we do have curbside pickup for compost and recycle, and a lot of people recycle, but they don't do it well. They don't pay attention to the rules. So we need lots of help. And the management here doesn't help either. They don't do anything to help educate people or set a good example. So I was wondering if we can get some help out here in the mobile home park.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I'm seeing nodding to let you know amongst the Flows team here. So thanks again for calling, and we'll answer that for you. Michelle, you look like you have a response for Jamie.
Yeah, first of all, thanks, Jamie. You're not alone. Thanks for participating with the EcoCycle program. Sometimes it does take a couple of different approaches, even in the same direction, to get stuff off the ground. And part of the beauty, I think, of flows is that we are a group. And I think when you're out there on your own trying to do stuff, it is a lot harder. And part of what we're doing is sort of trying to change the norm. And each little community, even within Boulder, can have its own little norms and own little culture that it creates around certain things. And we initially thought that we were going to work with the trailer homes in Boulder, and have done some trainings with Mapleton Trailer Park, our Mapleton Trailer Community, and we kind of felt like it was next level. Most of the upgrades that we do are things that renters can do, and trailer homes have a different level of need, plus people are owners. So we're still sort of in conversation about how do we serve that community. And, our home visits are sort of short. I think if we went into trailers, we'd need a little bit more time. A lot of times what they need is insulation and things underneath the unit. So that's another level of, getting in there and sort of knowing what you're doing and knowing what you're looking for. And our training is a little bit more broad and general than that at the moment. The city does offer PACE, but I think it's mostly more middle and upper income folks that get that. And then Energy Outreach Colorado has some programs. We used to have Long's Peak, which is where I would have sent Jamie.
And are those PACE and those, can you explain what those programs generally
Yeah, I
like?
think PACE is Partners for a Clean Environment.
So it's
something like that. But it's more of an audit. So I would say our home visits, if we wanted to get technical, are more like assessments, and audits are a little bit deeper. They can do blower door tests. They might, where we might insulate your hot water pipes. An auditing program might say, actually, you just need a new water heater, and Flows is not in the place to do that. Mostly in terms of funding. So if anyone's listening and wants to help us expand and grow some of these programs, we're open to it. So, and then really, I do think there's really something about getting involved. Like in Jamie's case, I really think it's hard to do it as one person, and people start to see it as like, something about you versus the issue that you're trying to work on. And I think the other thing, and when we do community outreach, I try to never let us table by ourselves when we're doing community outreach. We always have a buddy, because, situations that are frustrating when you're by yourself are funny when you're with a friend. Right? And so it just lightens the atmosphere and lightens the mood. So I hope maybe Jamie will get involved with Flows. We are looking for community technicians. So affordable housing residents, low to moderate income community members can apply and become Flows technicians and work with us. So that's something that Jamie could do.
I want to say, hi, Jamie. I just want to let you know that I feel your pain. I totally do. It's very frustrating to see your neighbors and your community maybe not be as passionate as we are about taking care of our own communities and of our planet. So I just want to let you know that I really appreciate your commitment. And something that I did in my own community, because of the same issue that you're mentioning, the fact that people, send their kids to, teach responsibility, go to send the trash, but the kids cannot even reach the trash, or they ended up dumping it in the wrong bin. Was that I disguised a eco-visit training behind a community event. So I invited all my neighbors to come and hang out in the park and bring snacks, and we were jumping rope and singing and dancing. And I had eco-cycles come and host a little training. They have all these game activities that you can learn how to sort trash correctly. So I was a little sneaky about that, but it was a way for me to feel like I was creating community, because I really feel like sometimes that sense of maybe this connection that people have with caring for their spaces is the fact that maybe they don't feel like they belong. Sometimes maybe they just belong to their space and not the larger community that surrounds them. So I feel like really connecting people to the community itself will maybe increase that sense of belonging, and then maybe lead to a desire to better care for the spaces. I think I was going to say something else and I forgot, but if I remember, I'll tell you, Jamie. That was it. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks for your call.
Bye.
Thank you.
And we do have another caller on the line. Ramon or Raymond, are you there?
Yep, it's Ramon.
Thank you so much for calling. What's your question or comment for the Flows team this morning?
So first, I just want to say what's up, Flows. What's up, Michelle? My question is about the City of Boulder's climate mobilization plan, and I'm wondering if Flows has a part of that, or is part of that mobilization plan, and if not, do you all have recommendations for how that plan should unfold or what they might need to do?
All right. It looks like again we're getting nods at recognition of this issue. So, who wants to take this one, Michelle? All right. And if you could explain the plan as well, and kind of give people that might not know what we're talking about here, kind of some background on that.
Sure. So this goes back to, and thank you, Ramon. Thanks for calling. Thanks for the sort of tough question. So, I was talking about working with policy before and sort of founding the Just Transition Collaborative and, sort of trying to say if Boulder's going to transition from this dirty economy, we need to make sure that the transition benefits every part of the community, and maybe even people who were hurt worst by the dirty economy, have them benefit first from transitioning to a clean economy. So that's sort of the framework of Just Transition. And we did work with them with policy. We've had a lot of conversations with the city, and we really have been amazed at how they have switched to, this general climate action plan, and then they agreed to incorporate equity into it and the concepts of a just transition. And then they came back to us early this year and said, what if, which is my dream, what if we centered equity? And then sort of had climate action be almost a subset of centering equity in the community, which I think is the direction that we need to go. I think to get where we want to go, that's probably the only way forward. And so I think that the city has tried to do this new climate mobilization action plan to help engage the community more in this climate action process and to try to center equity. I think part of what is challenging is that, sustainability, in a way, you can take some classes and learn about sustainability. You can learn about energy. You can learn about water and emissions. And in a way, that's just a matter of learning those things. Where I feel like equity is a little bit trickier, and anybody who's tried to have conversations with their family about race, class, gender, sexuality probably knows that that's much trickier territory. And so I think that I would love to see, the city has been, working with GARE, which is a national organization working on racial equity, to help train the city up. And what does it mean to center equity, and what would it look like? So I think that part of what's challenging is that equity is a little bit more difficult to just decide to work on. Because there are some minefields in there. So I think that I would love to see the city, continue working to see how do we center equity, and, what does that mean? What does that look like? How do we enact it? That means that we have to do things differently. So I think they're still working on it. We're still happy to help in whatever ways we can, and we're definitely still happy to help mobilize voices that are not usually at these tables. And I think the city just had a climate mobilization action plan launch, and we're really hoping to see a little bit more diversity and see, more second English language learners there. And I don't think we've gotten there quite yet. The county also as a whole is working on this as well and trying to center equity in their climate resilience planning. I'm a part of that as well and trying to help them figure out what that means, what it could look like, and what things are different. When we're talking about environmentalism, Remy sort of spoke about, there's actually different ways to approach it. And I think that's what catches most people off guard, and most policymakers and people who've been involved in sustainability as a mainstream thing for a while.
All right. Look at you. Answered a difficult question. Thank you for your call. We really appreciate you calling in with that one. And we do have another caller on the phone. Peter, are you there?
I am here.
Thank you. Of course, Peter. Thank you for calling in. What question or comment do you have for the Flows team?
I was interested to hear if you guys ever bring into the conversation diet choice as a sustainability tip. And I myself have kind of found that as a way I can make a choice today to become more sustainable.
Excellent. And we again get nods. Remy looks like she has an answer for you. Here, Remy, what are your thoughts there?
Well, food sustainability is one of the things that I'm really passionate about, especially right now in my life. So my tip was actually about that. A lot of people talk about going vegetarian and vegan as the most healthy diet for the planet, and I think that's a pretty well accepted concept. 14.5% of the world's CO2 emissions come from livestock. That came from the New York Times, if anyone wants to go look. They did a good article on like food and climate change, big expose on it. But livestock also employs 1.3 billion people worldwide, and it is a big part of how people all across the world get access to protein and nutrition. And so I think a lot of people like take it on themselves and say, if I'm vegetarian or if I'm vegan, I can kind of like fight the system. And so I do think that there are a lot of personal choices that we can make and change. And if you can be culturally, if it's in your culture to be vegetarian or vegan, that's good. The tip I wrote down is for people who like seafood. Seafood has a lot of carbon miles, especially if you live here in Colorado. But if you're visiting somewhere that's maybe a little bit closer to the ocean, people recommend eating oysters, mussels, and clams because they sequester carbon. They take it out of the ocean to like build their shells. So they actually help with, when we have talked about like ocean acidification from excess carbon being absorbed into the oceans, they help combat that. And they also clean water because they're filter feeders. So they're a sustainable option if you like seafood. But then along all those things is that remembering if like food is something that's really important to you, I'd say like go Google or ask a friend and find an organization that's their mission and get involved with them, because part of the reasons we have a lot of these problems is because they prey off us feeling isolated and putting the burden on us to make all the change. And if we start organizing, we get a lot more collective power to stand up against systems that like profit off of us feeling like it's up on us to make decisions. So,
Angela. Oh, 1 second.
Kind of a touchy subject, and it's a hard conversation to have with friends sometimes because everybody's pretty willing to, try reusable bags. That's pretty painless, but the food is very, close to the heart and has a lot of tradition in it. People love the food they eat, and it's part of your family, like that old traditional meal. So changing that is a bit more difficult for most people, and it's been tough, just making that choice myself and becoming a bit more isolated in that way. I can't get all excited about bacon anymore with my friends because we used to be like, yeah, I love bacon. This is so delicious and tasty. And I'm like, now my bacon is made with carrots. And it's not the same conversation.
Definitely. And thank you for your efforts. I mean, I think that this is, part of what does make the Boulder community unique. I think a lot of us are willing to make sacrifices for the greater good. And going to the cultural piece, I think part of what is hard is that a lot of those cultural foods, a lot of those traditional meals, were actually not harmful for the environment. And part of the reason that agriculture has all those emissions is because it's more factory farming. It's more of a factory than it is an animal, if that makes sense. I think in Boulder especially, people are sort of catching on to regenerative agriculture, and a lot of those practices actually entail having animals and the ways in which animals can really, really beneficial to an ecosystem. And, when I think of the United States, I think one of the biggest tragedies here, with the genocide of Native Americans that happened, and, we're still in the tail ends of, hopefully that's stopping is what I mean. And there were so many buffalo, Indians and settlers, would talk about how where you had plains full of buffalo. You couldn't even see the ground below the buffalo. It was just moving waves of brown, which was the buffalo. And, that ecosystem developed with the buffalo. The buffalo are incredibly beneficial. The way that Native Americans were eating buffalo was incredibly ecologically sound and helped the ecosystem. So, I think part of what makes some of these conversations hard is that our traditions are not what is unhealthy, right? So our traditions, for those of us who do come from communities that were eating meat, it was often cyclical. There were seasons, and now it is all meat, every meal, all the time, and the animals are being grown in a way that is completely inhumane. Usually things that are inhumane are bad for the environment, and factory farms are a really good example of that. So something that people can do is, on the one hand, change your diet. On the other hand, make calls, make policy changes. One of the tips that I was going to give is, we have a lot of people asking about recycling and compost, and those things are really important. I think it also makes a difference when you just turn over that wrapper and you see the little number on the back and you call it and you say, I can't believe, Fritos, I can't believe you are making me throw away this tiny little bag that just had some chips in it. So putting some of the onus, again, like Remy was saying, on those manufacturers, that's something you can do as an individual. It's definitely something you can do as a group.
And Peter, I just wanted to mention, some of our messaging definitely around diet changes just goes back to buying local, buying organic, buying in bulk. And for the meat eaters, just maybe reducing consumption. We definitely don't encourage people to step outside their cultural norms, but more than anything to just develop that consciousness around what kind of ingredients are you buying, and reducing. We have the whole idea of meatless Mondays and Taco Tuesdays. We promote that too.
Yeah, and at the university too, it's like, can you make a change just for a day, and then you can try all of these different foods too.
Peter, thank you so much for your call. Yeah. And we also have Jim on the line. Jim, what's your question or comment for the group?
I'm just wondering how you can do a mix of the wonderful things where you're building things locally with, connections and stories and stuff. Can you also, at the same time, be doing sort of building a long-term organization on the larger issues like Extinction Rebellion and the Sunrise Movement and 350 Colorado, doing protests against fracking and against war? Like, war is one of the biggest causes of climate change because of all the jets. And there's sort of these big things, like trying to get the city to not use J.P. Morgan Chase and get away from big banks and big hedge funds that take over the media. And somehow you've been saying all the right things, more than I can think of, like the local food and buy in bulk and all that stuff. But also to somehow build I don't know what we have anymore, but build some sort of thing where you stay together as people in the environmental center or CU, but you're not just backing a football team or something. You help connect and do things like work against toxics and against war and fracking and all that stuff, and forcing politicians to be better and forcing bureaucrats to make changes.
Yes, thank you, Jim. I'm with you on all of that. I think something that flows has actually run into as a barrier is exactly what you're talking about. And we do have people that are like, I want to be involved, and but I don't necessarily want to be a technician, right? And we sort of have realized that, we do have, thank you for naming, like 350.org. We have Sunrise Movement. There's some Extinction Rebellion work happening in this area. There's not really an environmental justice organization in Boulder. And we have been in conversations with the county, with the city, with community members, with residents about this, and how Flows is a little bit in a tough place in terms of trying to be that, because we are centered out of the university. And so we have to, we're in that mission, and there's certain boundaries around us. And, some of us have even had conversations. Should we go and form a 501c3 that really centers equity within environmental work? And I have founded a nonprofit before in the past, and it was a lot of work and a lot of life force went into that. So I think what we had come to is a lot of us that were having that conversation weren't really ready to do that. But it's on the table. I'm not exactly sure what it's going to look like. I'm not exactly sure who's going to lead. You know, we mentioned 350 and Sunrise and those folks. There's also like Centro Amistad and some organizations that are doing equity work. So there's also some conversation about what if we put these organizations together somehow. In my work at the university, aside from flows, a lot of my work is actually trying to combine sustainability and social justice. And like I mentioned before, that can be a minefield, and I think that it's a tension that we're going to have to work through.
The Air Club does some of that stuff, and sometimes it is a real social justice and environmental thing where people usually put toxic facilities in lower income places and exploit the people that don't have as many assets and stuff. So the people who seem to support the environment the most are often the people that are not the wealthiest.
Yes.
Anyway, but thanks so much for this, and support what you guys are doing. I really like that you're so, I don't know whether the words, so many ecumenical or many types of people, and it sounds really neat. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There was one other thing I wanted to put out there with what he said. It's escaping me now.
We'll let you think about
Okay.
it. As we're getting near the end of the program, I've noticed that Remy, Michelle, and Angela, you've gotten to give some of your tips of what you were talking about. But Adonuni, we haven't heard your tip yet. So as we get to the end, I was curious, what tip do you have? What's your thing that you would like to share with people as far as a sustainability practice, or just your thing that you're really interested in related to sustainability?
So one tip I always like to give out is, Boulder and Colorado in general is a very dry environment, and one way to keep air mass and temperature in general in your house pretty constant is just adding a humidifier, or just boiling water and stove and stuff, and just keeping that going throughout the winter, because no one wants a dry nose and getting their nose bleeding and stuff. So that sucks. Yeah.
And I remember seeing family always with if you had a fireplace, which you don't see as much, but the stove, having that
Water.
ridiculously calloused looking container on top of it. Well, as we draw to the end of the program, we want to make sure that everybody knows that this is the FLOWS team, which is the Foundations for Leaders Organizing for Water and Sustainability. They are a group out of CU Boulder. We are putting together, this is part of an ongoing series that is in partnership from a grant from Boulder County. You can go to news.kgnu.org to find the entire series. And you can also become a FLOWS resident technician if you'd like by going to colorado.edu/ecenter/flows. So thank you all again for joining me this morning. We've appreciated having you, and we look forward to continuing our series with the FLOWS team.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks, everybody.